The Superstition Mountains loomed over the desert like a jagged crown of stone, casting long shadows over the cactus-studded valley below. The heat was beginning to fade as the sun dipped lower, but the oppressive stillness in the air remained. Sarah adjusted her backpack and glanced at the group trailing behind her. Ethan offered her a tired smile. Chris, ever the joker, kicked rocks and muttered jokes about treasure-hunting miners. At the back, Emily trudged silently, her head low, casting anxious glances toward the cliffs. "Something feels off," Emily whispered after a moment. "Like, we're not supposed to be here." Chris grinned, swinging a stick in the air like a sword. "We're cursed. They say anyone who hikes too far into the Superstition Mountains never makes it back." "Chris, knock it off," Sarah snapped. "This place is creepy enough without you making things worse." But Emily's unease deepened, and Sarah couldn't shake the heavy feeling in her own gut, like the desert was watching them. Too quiet, too still. By the time they reached the clearing, the sky was painted with streaks of crimson and violet. A circle of barrel cacti surrounded a flat patch of ground where they decided to camp. Ethan dumped his pack and exhaled. "This'll do." Chris wandered off to gather kindling, whistling as he went, while Sarah set up the tents. Emily remained on the outskirts of the clearing, her gaze fixed on a strange formation near the base of a saguaro, a perfect spiral of stones, arranged too deliberately to be random. "Guys," Emily called, her voice tight with dread. "Look at this." Chris returned, arms full of brittle ocotelo branches, grinning as he saw the stones. "Oh no, we found the cursed circle. Better leave now before we summon something." "Shut up," Sarah muttered, nudging the stones with her boot. As her foot disturbed the spiral, a gust of wind tore through the clearing, swirling dust and dead leaves in a whirlwind. The temperature seemed to drop instantly, and the ocotelo branches bent as though under the weight of unseen hands. Then the wind stopped, leaving only the silence. The group sat around the fire, the flames licking upward in dancing spirals. Shadows flickered across their faces, and the desert night wrapped around them in a cold, heavy silence. Above them, the stars were scattered across the black sky like shards of glass, sharp and brilliant. The wind had died down, leaving the air still and heavy. Chris leaned back on his elbows, smirking. "All right, time for a game. Who's got a scary story?" He reached into his pack, pulled out a half-empty bottle of whiskey, and took a long swig before offering it to the others. Sarah waved it away. "Not tonight. I'm already sweating out everything I've got." Ethan took the bottle, though, giving Sarah a teasing grin. "Come on, babe. It's not a hike without a little whiskey." Emily sat cross-legged, chewing her lip. "Maybe we shouldn't. I mean, this place already feels off." Chris rolled his eyes. "Come on, Em. Don't go all sixth sense on us again." He gave a mock shiver. "Ooh, the spirits of the desert are coming to get us." "Seriously?" Sarah shot him a warning look. "Don't be a jerk," Ethan grinned. All right. Let's hear it then. Who's got a story?" Chris leaned closer to the fire, his grin widening. "Okay, so there's this guy. Hiker, right? Comes out here looking for the lost Dutchman's gold mine. You know, the one people say is buried somewhere in these mountains." Emily shifted uncomfortably. So Chris continued, "This dude hikes all the way out, thinking he's gonna be rich. But the thing is, every time someone finds the mine, they go crazy. Like full-on insane. They wander back out of the mountains mumbling about monsters. Sometimes they never come back at all." Ethan snorted. "Sounds like an old wives' tale." Chris gave him a sly grin. "Maybe. But legend says there's something in these mountains, something ancient that guards the gold. And it doesn't just kill you. It makes you forget who you are. You disappear just like that." He snapped his fingers. The fire popped loudly, and everyone jumped. "Jesus," Sarah muttered, hugging her knees. "Come on." "That wasn't so bad," Chris said with a laugh. "All right, Sarah, your turn." The fire crackled and hissed as Sarah leaned back against her pack, arms crossed over her knees. The others waited for her to begin, their faces illuminated in flickering orange light. She hated being put on the spot, but Chris's obnoxious grin told her he wouldn't let it go. "All right, fine," she said with a sigh. "Here's a stupid one." Chris grinned and leaned forward. "This better be good, or I'm demanding a refund on your campfire privileges." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Don't get your hopes up. So, there's this old car, right? A '67 Chevy Impala. Gorgeous thing. Black with all the chrome still intact." Ethan smirked. "We talking supernatural vibes here?" Sarah shot him a playful glare. "Not exactly. Anyway, the guy who owns it loves this car, washes it every weekend, keeps it running smooth. It's the love of his life, pretty much. But one day, out of nowhere, it just dies on the highway. Middle of nowhere, no warning." Chris snorted. "Let me guess, the car comes to life and eats him." No, Sarah leaned closer to the fire, her voice low and deliberate. "A trucker pulls over to help him out, and the guy swears the car was running fine just an hour ago. But when they pop the hood, the engine is gone." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Like, stolen?" Sarah shrugged. "Completely gone. No engine, no nothing. And the weird thing is, the car looks perfectly fine from the outside. No scratches, no sign anyone tampered with it. But now, it's just an empty shell. So the guy gets a tow and figures, whatever, he'll fix it later. But when he goes to check the car the next morning, the engine is right back where it was, looking brand new." Chris scoffed, tossing a stick into the fire. "Ooh, spooky. A teleporting engine." "Yeah. I told you it was stupid," Sarah muttered, leaning back and brushing dust off her jeans. Emily gave her a small, sympathetic smile, but the tension in her body hadn't relaxed. She sat rigid, her knees hugged to her chest, eyes flicking toward the dark shapes surrounding them, tall silhouettes of saguaro cacti standing silent and still under the cold desert sky. Chris threw his hands up. "Come on, Sarah. That was barely a story. Where's the blood? Where's the twist? You gotta go big with these things." Ethan chuckled, but it was a nervous kind of laugh. He shifted where he sat, glancing into the darkness beyond the campfire. The light only reached so far, and the world beyond it was an endless expanse of shadows, too dark, too still. The desert wasn't supposed to feel this quiet. "All right, my turn again," Chris said with a grin, clearly not picking up on the unease creeping through the group. "How about this one? A bunch of idiot hikers head into the Superstition Mountains and start." "Chris," enough, Sarah cut in, her voice sharper than she intended. Chris smirked but leaned back. All right, no fun allowed tonight." The fire popped again, and Emily flinched. She had been quiet for a while now, her fingers tracing invisible shapes in the dirt. Finally, she spoke, her voice small but deliberate. "There's actually something I read about these mountains," Emily said, her words hesitant but insistent. "They say these hills are cursed." Chris groaned dramatically. "Oh great, here we go." Emily pressed on, ignoring him. "I'm serious. There are stories people have gone missing out here for centuries. Native tribes warned settlers not to come too deep into these parts. Miners, hikers, they disappear and no one ever finds them. And the few that do make it back, they're different." Ethan stopped laughing. "Different how?" Emily looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "They lose their minds. They say something was hunting them, something ancient, something that's part of the land. It doesn't just kill you, it makes you forget who you are. Or worse, it makes you do things." The firelight flickered, and Ethan glanced nervously over his shoulder. Even Chris's smug grin wavered for a moment, Yeah, spirits. Got it. Chris tried to sound dismissive, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. He tossed another stick into the fire with a little too much force, the flames sputtering as sparks leapt skyward. Emily's gaze didn't waver. This isn't a joke, Chris. They say the land keeps you. If it takes you, no one ever knows what happened. It's like you just disappear, and the desert doesn't leave a trace. A heavy silence fell over the group, the only sound the soft crackle of the fire. For the first time that night, Chris had nothing clever to say. Ethan shifted again, visibly uncomfortable, and Sarah reached for her water bottle, trying to shake off the creeping chill that had settled over her. Well, Sarah said, trying to force a smile, let's just make sure we don't end up part of the legend. Okay. Chris grinned, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Yeah, as long as nobody touches any cursed rocks or pisses off the ghost miners, we'll be fine. Emily gave him a sharp look, but before she could say anything else, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, making the fire gutter and sputter. The temperature seemed to drop instantly, as if the desert night had reached out and wrapped icy fingers around them. The firelight flickered one last time and then went out. Then it began soft, deliberate footsteps, moving in a wide circle around them, just beyond the edge of the firelight. Ethan aimed his flashlight toward the sound, but the beam illuminated nothing, only shifting sands and thorny bushes. Probably just a jackrabbit, Sarah whispered, trying to convince herself. Then the fire went out, swallowed by darkness, as if smothered by unseen hands. Panic erupted. Ethan struck matches with trembling hands, but each one fizzled out before the flames could catch. Sarah fumbled through her pack for the spare flashlight. Chris cursed under his breath, and Emily hugged her knees, whispering, "It's here. It's watching." Then it came a shriek, inhuman and guttural, tearing through the night like the wail of something ancient and hungry. "Run," Chris shouted, bolting into the dark. They scattered, sprinting blindly into the desert. Sarah ran, her lungs burning, Ethan just behind her. The desert was an unforgiving maze. Rocks, thorny chala cacti, and tangled agave plants blocked their path. Their boots slipped on loose stones as they climbed an incline, each step more desperate than the last. Chris veered off to the left, thinking he could loop around to higher ground. But as he reached a narrow pass between yucca plants, something moved. A shadow too fast, too large, darted across the rocks. 1 second, Chris was stumbling through the rocky clearing, laughing nervously. The next, a shadow slammed into him, and his scream tore through the night. The others barely caught a glimpse of his face contorted in terror before he was dragged into the dark. His scream echoed and then cut off, leaving nothing but the rustling of disturbed ocoteo branches swaying in the windless night. Emily shrieked, lunging after him, but Ethan grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "He's gone," Ethan snapped, his voice cracking. "We need to move now." Panic gripped Sarah, but she forced it down, adrenaline burning through her limbs. "Stick together," she shouted. "Everyone, stay close." The three of them bolted, plunging into the maze of desert flora. Prickly pears, barrel cacti, and spiny agaves clawed at their clothes and skin as they ran blindly into the night. The creature's growl followed them, low and guttural, almost like mocking laughter. They sprinted for what felt like hours, lungs burning, legs shaking from the effort. Finally, the land dipped, and they slid down into a dry arroyo, the soft gravel breaking their fall. For a moment, silence returned, broken only by their ragged breathing. "Do you think it's gone?" Emily whispered, clutching her side. "I don't know," Sarah panted. Her pulse was racing, her skin slick with sweat despite the cold desert air. They crouched low, huddling beneath the overhanging lip of the wash, their backs pressed to the jagged stone. Ethan scanned the ridge above them, clutching a rock in his hand as if it were a weapon. "We can't stay here," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "If it comes back..." "We need a plan," Sarah interrupted, trying to think past the pounding of her heart. "If it's hunting us, we have to stay together. We can't outrun it, but maybe we can fight it." Ethan gave her a doubtful look, but Emily nodded, her voice shaky. "It's just an animal, right? It bleeds. If it bleeds, we can kill it." Ethan snorted bitterly. "Yeah, sure. With what? Our fists. We'll use whatever we can find," Sarah said, scanning the ground around them. "Rocks, sticks, anything sharp." She grabbed a jagged stone, testing its weight in her palm. Ethan followed suit, his expression grim, while Emily picked up a broken chala branch, its needles bristling dangerously. "Better than nothing," Emily murmured, though she looked ready to cry. The wash provided some cover, but the sense of being watched never left. Every time the wind shifted, Emily swore she heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, as though the thing was circling them just out of sight. They didn't have to wait long. A sound low and wet, like the dragging of claws across stone, echoed from the ridge above them. Then the creature lunged down into the wash. It crawled toward them on all fours, its elongated limbs bending unnaturally at the joints. Its skin was the color of dust, pale and cracked, like dried clay left under the scorching sun for centuries. Thin, sinewy muscles stretched across its skeletal frame, and every movement was deliberate, calculated, like a predator toying with its prey. Its head was grotesquely large, with an elongated jaw that gaped too wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth stained dark. Two empty, glassy eyes glowed faintly under the moonlight, soulless orbs that reflected no life, only hunger. A long, serpentine tongue slithered from between its teeth, tasting the air, and its claws, razor-sharp and blackened, scraped across the rocks with a bone-chilling screech. Ethan stepped forward, wielding his flashlight like a club. "Stay back," he yelled, but his voice wavered. The creature stopped, tilting its head in a mockery of curiosity, before lunging with terrifying speed. Ethan was the first to react. With a shout, he hurled a rock straight at the creature's face. The stone hit with a dull thud, and the monster snarled, momentarily stunned. Now Sarah screamed. They attacked in unison. Sarah swung her rock at the creature's legs, while Emily jabbed the chala branch into its side. Ethan pounced from the other side, smashing another stone down on its head with all his strength. The monster screeched, collapsing onto the ground in a heap of tangled limbs. For a moment, the air was filled with the sound of their frantic breathing and the rasping hiss of the dying creature. Did we kill it?" Emily gasped, backing away. Ethan stood over the thing, panting, his chest rising and falling. "I think so. I think we..." The words died in his throat. The creature's body twitched once, then twice. Slowly, impossibly, it began to rise, its head snapping toward them with a sound like dry bones grinding together. "Oh God," Sarah whispered, stumbling back. "It's not dead. It's not dead." The monster let out a low, rattling growl, and they realized, with soul-crushing dread, that it had only been playing with them. "Run," Sarah screamed, grabbing Emily's hand. They scrambled out of the wash, hearts pounding in their throats. Desperation drove them forward, dodging between clusters of palo verde trees and thorny bushes. Sarah's hands were cut and bleeding from the cacti she had brushed past, but she barely felt the pain. All she could think about was getting away, just a few more steps, just a little further. "We have to find the road," Emily cried, her voice cracking. "We're trying," Ethan snapped, frustration and fear thick in his voice. The monster followed, always just behind them, sometimes silent, sometimes growling low in its throat, as if it enjoyed their panic. It wasn't chasing to kill. It was hurting them. Sarah's stomach twisted with the horrifying realization. "We're not going anywhere," she shouted. "It's leading us in circles." Ethan cursed under his breath, but they had no choice but to keep running. They sprinted deeper into the desert, dodging jagged rocks and thorny brush. Behind them, the creature's footsteps echoed faster, relentless, always just behind them. They stumbled upon a steep ravine carved by long-gone floods. It looked like a dead end, but Ethan didn't hesitate. "We can climb up the other side." The three of them slid down the sandy slope, gasping as they reached the bottom. Ethan helped Emily up first, then turned to Sarah, pulling her toward the ledge. "We've got this," Ethan panted, a wild glint of hope in his eyes. "We're almost out." They stumbled onto what looked like a path, a narrow, well-worn trail cutting through the brush. For a moment, hope flickered in Sarah's chest. "The trailhead, it has to be close," she cried. But Emily froze, staring at the ground with wide, terrified eyes. "No," she whispered. "No, we've been here before." Sarah looked down and felt her heart drop. There, at the edge of the trail, lay the spiral of stones, perfect and untouched, exactly as it had been when they first arrived. "We're back where we started," Ethan breathed, his voice filled with disbelief. Emily sank to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "It won't let us leave. We're never getting out of here." The monster appeared again, slithering out from the shadows with a horrifying grace. It stood between them and the spiral of stones, blocking any hope of escape. Ethan roared in fury, charging at the creature with a jagged rock in hand. "Come on, you bastard," he screamed. The creature met him halfway, its mouth stretching into that grotesque grin. It moved with terrifying speed, dodging Ethan's strike and swiping a clawed hand across his chest. Ethan crumpled to the ground, gasping for breath as blood soaked into the dirt. Sarah and Emily could only watch in horror as Ethan was pulled into the shadows, his scream cut off with a sickening crunch. No, Sarah sobbed, but she knew there was no saving him. Sarah and Emily climbed to a ledge desperately, their hands raw and bleeding. But the desert remained silent. Sarah knew better. "It's still out there," she said, almost sobbing. The two stumbled forward, the night stretching endlessly before them. They tried to find the trailhead, tried to believe they could escape, but the Superstition Mountains are not kind. They heard it again, the scrape of claws on rock, the low, hungry growl, just before the creature appeared once more, blocking their path. Sarah grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it at the creature. It struck the monster's skull with a dull thud, but it didn't even flinch. Emily sank to her knees, her body trembling. "We can't win," she whispered. Sarah grabbed Emily's hand, yanking her to her feet. "We have to fight," she screamed. Together, they attacked Emily with the cholla branch, Sarah with her fists and teeth and whatever strength she had left. They fought like animals, driven by sheer desperation. For a moment, it seemed like they had the upper hand, but the monster was toying with them. It let them fight, let them think they had a chance. The monster circled them slowly, savoring the moment. Then it lunged, its claws slicing through the night like a scythe. Morning came slowly, casting soft, golden light over the desert. The campsite stood empty, the fire pit cold. Their tents remained where they had left them, untouched and silent. At the center of the clearing, the spiral of stones lay perfectly intact, but it had 4 new stones in the spiral. There were no footprints, no signs of a struggle. Only silence. A faint breeze stirred the dust, carrying a soft, playful whisper, "Stay." And the desert swallowed the sound whole,